So my first level of debugging always comes down to linting, or way that I'm using linting in this context of debugging is kind of in a sense of type checking. If I make a typo, my linter is going to point that out. And to actually accomplish this, what we're going to use is eslint. Eslint's a very, very popular tool for JavaScript, for TypeScript, whatever you're doing. If you're working with React Native, if you're working with JavaScript, you're probably going to use eslint if you want linting. Installation is going to be really easy, so we're just going to open up our terminal. I'll go ahead and say yarn add --dev. You could also do npm install --save -dev eslint, and then linting configs are personal. Some people like really robust ones that have a lot of very strict rules. Other people have like very basic ones. Personally, I like kind of a mix between those. So if you've used the Airbnb config, it's very strict. It's very thorough in its rules. Then there's other ones that are just very, very basic. What I've gone ahead and is actually customized or simplified Airbnbs. So what we could do is say, if you want to use the exact same one I'm going to use in this course or this class or all my other classes, you could say eslint config handlebar labs. Just make sure you add that as a development dependency because it doesn't need to ship to production. So once that's installed, what we can do, well, first off, we can see it's gone ahead, added those packages to our development dependencies. Next thing we need to do to actually enable this is go ahead, create a new file, call this .eslint.rc.js, or you could use a different format. I just prefer JS. So we can say module.exports in here, and then we're going to say extends handlebar labs. So once I save this and go back to my app.js, basically we don't see anything up here, but as we scroll down, we can see this little red squiggly line. And the actual editor I'm using here is Visual Studio Code if you want to use the same one, but every common editor has some sort of integration with eslint. But basically, this is one of the rules I like. I don't want a unused variable in a function, so I can just go ahead and remove that. Another rule that I've got enabled is if a variable that I've imported isn't being used, it'll underline that for me and tell me that it's never been used. Go ahead and remove that. Now, those are just preference things. Where does this come in for debugging? Well, if you make a typo as you're working, it'll go ahead and point that out to you so that you don't have to wait till you get to that screen to find out that your styles aren't working or not referencing the correct variable. So, for example, say you're working with a view and we'll save this. We'll be like, all right, this is set up how it is right now. I want to get a background color and some styling. So go ahead and say style is equal to styles dot container. Save this. I've got an error here. But if we were looking over here in the editor, you could actually see that eslint's going to point out that styles with two S's is not defined. So it's like this level of type checking to make sure, maybe type checking isn't the right thing or right name, but it's basically telling us little things that could happen in our code. How can we avoid those? So I know I've had many instances where very simple little typos ended up in me spending 3 hours trying to debug an issue that wasn't actually there. It's just me being fat-fingered and hitting the wrong keys. So having linting in place is really nice in that case, just to make sure you're using the right variable names, you're accessing the right things. You don't have little syntax errors. Those are always the huge pains. They can ship to production. I've done it plenty of times, and using something like eslint is kind of going to help us preemptively avoid these bugs. So I'm going to say we're debugging if we're debugging a bug before we even cause it to happen. So I'd highly encourage you to use eslint in your projects. Eslint config handlebar labs is a nice intermediate between really, really strict rules and simple rules. So with that all said, set up eslint in your project and avoid a ton of squiggly red lines, just so you can be a little bit more confident in your code that you don't have any typos or syntax errors.